Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the RSE Investigates Conservation series. And this is the last one in the series. And welcome to those of you who are less familiar with the Royal Society of Edinburgh. It is Scotland's National Academy. Its mission is to advance learning and useful knowledge. And by doing so, it supports the cultural, economic and social well-being of Scotland and its people. Is not influenced by causes promoted by others and is an important source of independent expertise across the whole range of intellectual, business and public life in Scotland. And the fellowship includes people from a wide range of disciplines: science and technology, arts, humanities, social science, business and public service. And indeed our speaker today, Professor David Breeze, is indeed a fellow of the Royal Society. Now I will let David explain everything about what he's talking about with the frontiers of the Roman Empire, the Antonine Wall and World Heritage. My name is Rebecca Jones. I've also been heavily involved in World Heritage and worked with David over the years, which is one of the reasons I've been asked to introduce this, and it's a great pleasure for me. So without further ado, I'm delighted to announce Professor David Breeze, who has been chair of the International Congress of Roman Frontier Studies, and he led the team of which I was a member, which resulted in the inscription of the Antonine Wall as a World Heritage Property. He's published numerous books on a wide range of things, but particularly on the Antonine Wall, Hadrian's Wall, and on the Roman Army. And he's an honorary professor at the universities of Durham, Edinburgh, Newcastle, and Stirling. And over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Becky, for that introduction. I'll just share my screen, and here we go. There we go. I'm sure, good afternoon, fellows and guests. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with many World Heritage sites, such as this, which doesn't need any explanation, or indeed this, Petra, Uluru in Australia, of course, our own St Kilda, which is a very complex World Heritage Site. It's protected on natural and cultural grounds, as well as maritime. And of course, the Great Wall of China, which became a World Heritage Site in 1980. The dates where I've added them to the slides indicate the date in which a particular property became a World Heritage Site. So the first actually was in 1978, and we've been moving forward steadily since then, and there are well over 1,000 now. Rome, of course, came in pretty early on, and that is important for us because Rome was the center of the empire. And the project I'm going to be discussing is looking at not the center of the empire or any of the great monuments of Rome, like the Pont de Gaulle, Volubilis in Morocco, Petra indeed, and so on. What I'm looking at is the very edge of the empire, the red line on this map. That line marks the frontiers of the Roman Empire. This particular one, it's in the Hadrianic period. The others I'll be showing are the Antonine period. And we felt that it was really important that this should be considered a World Heritage Site. After all, it's the frontier which defined the Roman Empire itself. Hadrian's Wall became a World Heritage Site in 1987, and for many years it was the only Roman frontier that was a World Heritage Site. But about the year 2000, our colleagues in Germany were looking at their frontier, which you can see crossing from bottom to top, the straight line on this aerial photograph, and that became a World Heritage Site in 2005, followed by the Antonine Wall in 2008. So by 2008, we had 3 sections in care: the Antonine Wall, the Hadrian's Wall, and the Upper German Ration Limes in Germany, the 3 marked in blue. Since then, we've moved forward. A couple of years ago, the green area came in, which is Lower German frontier in both the Netherlands and in Germany, and the blue area, which covers Austria, Bavaria, and Slovakia. So those right away across Europe, as far as Slovakia, as far as the Hungarian border, are now all World Heritage Sites. And up for consideration at the moment with UNESCO in Paris is Dacia, modern Transylvania in Romania, which is the red circle off to the east. These new sections include some really fantastic sites like Eining in Bavaria, Treismau in Austria. Believe it or not, you're looking at a Roman building which up to the top of the towers and the gate is actually Roman, and only the extra bit above the floor, above the gate, is modern, and the Harling is relatively new. I can remember that going on a few years ago. So that's in Austria, and further down, yet to come in, under consideration, is this late Roman fort at Capodava in Romania. You can see the Danube in the background, and you get some idea of the scale of this by identifying the visitors, the people standing beside or on the monument itself. That gives you some idea of scale. So we have, if you like, Europe under control. We're moving steadily forward, but when we move outside Europe, it really is just a little bit more difficult to bring in the great sites of the eastern frontier and North Africa. This is Khan al-Halabat in Syria, tremendous site. It's obviously an oasis monument. It's protecting the Roman fort. This quadribergium, as it's called, is protecting the oasis you see in the background. Here's Gazabashir in Jordan. These are not gargoyles perched on the top of the tower. These are people who have climbed up the stairs, 3 stories high, this tower, climbed up the steps and have emerged on the very top. This is how well preserved it is. And you can see also people at the bottom giving you an idea of the scale of this, which is the best preserved Roman fort in the whole of the Roman Empire. In North Africa, Bungem, as it was when I was there in the late 1960s, excavated by the French, is another tremendously important site in North Africa. I've just chosen that, and this in Algeria, which is one of the walls closing off the wadis, and you can see at the very top that, in fact, the passage along the top of the wall was covered over to protect whoever was inside. So there's still a lot to do in extending the protection which is afforded by the nomination and inscription of World Heritage Site status on countries in North Africa and in the Middle East. Well, how do you get any monument, a property, to be a World Heritage Site? What you're looking at is roughly £400,000 worth of documentation for the Antonine Wall, collected over 4 years, which was submitted in the blue box at the back, which is rather like a sort of IKEA table. You open it and out comes the Antonine Wall in the center. In the green are the maps which Beckley's office prepared, 59 maps identifying the monument. The blue to the left is a nomination document. The purple to the right is a nomination document. The blue is a management plan, and top right, the reddish one, is those 2 documents as DVDs. And this was submitted to UNESCO in Paris, and an 18-month process is then set in place in order to check the documentation, and an expert in the field comes to have a look at the monument itself. So just to give you a flavour of what goes into this work, this is the fort at Rough Castle. It lies between Falkirk and Bonnybridge. It's an earthwork, but you can see at the top the Antonine Wall running across towards the top of the screen. We've got the fort to the left with its gates, top, bottom, west, east gate here, and a road leading through into the annex, which is defended by its own ditches. It survives an earthwork, but it survives well as this earthwork. So the first step is mapping the monument and defining what you want to protect. The yellow is the fort and annex at Rough Castle. And the differential shading here shows, first of all, the different features: the upcast mound, the ditch, the rampart, the road, which is brown, and the, as you can see, more or less in the center, the light shading indicates here that the monument has been destroyed but can be restored with certainty, and the darker shades are where it is visible. The outer line is the boundary of the proposed World Heritage Site. Standing back from that, we can see Rough Castle in the centre again, but sitting in this lighter area, which is a buffer zone. The UNESCO insists on every World Heritage Site should be protected from development wherever possible by the creation of buffer zones. So that was not an easy task to do in central Scotland. One has to be able to show that the monument is conserved. Conserved obviously in every way, protected, presented, but in this case, conservation is simply looking after the monument itself. And this was a new section of the Antonine Wall taken into state care, with Historic Scotland staff clearing away the much of the unnecessary woodwork and particularly the rhododendrons. And the monument, you have to be able to show that you can present and interpret the monument well. This is in fact the bathhouse in the fort at Bear's Den on the Antonine Wall, and here's the interpretive panel, in fact being read by, as it happens, by my father. Research is important. Here we demonstrated this by simply a photograph showing some of the publications we've created over the years relating to the Antonine Wall, and community involvement. Roads are a good indicator. There's Roman Road and Antonine Wall, Antonine Court, and so on. But we felt the ultimate was this, the Roman bar in Falkirk. I mean, that is community involvement at its highest, I think. And it's important to keep the public informed. I'd had bad experience of this, where the public on a previous occasion not been kept informed, and the proposal simply fell because of local objections. But it just gives you a flavour of the newspapers we were in over the 4 years leading up to the nomination. And to underpin, in particular, the agreement to manage the monument properly, and this is very important to UNESCO, looking forward, that we can demonstrate that the monument can be looked after by state authorities, local authorities, other bodies obviously as well. And this particular occasion, the then Minister Patricia Ferguson is signing the agreement from central government and the 5 local authorities along the Antonine Wall to clarify their involvement now and in the future, the management of the Antonine Wall. So we're back to this. This was all submitted to UNESCO. It went through the grill of inspection, in desktop inspection and in the field. And in 2008, at the meeting of the UNESCO in Quebec, we became a World Heritage Site. obviously, I've touched on monuments in various places, and I've touched on the fact that we're dealing with several countries. So international cooperation in the move forward is really very important. Of course, in Roman frontiers, international cooperation started many years and indeed decades ago. The 1890s was the absolutely crucial decade. This was the decade that excavations on the Antonine Wall at Hadrian's Wall started, and the Rijkslimescommission was founded in Germany. It was founded by Theodor Mommsen on the left, and it was mainly rather like the Ordnance Survey. Most of the original board members were army officers, and to the right is Oscar von Save, who actually came in the 1890s to visit Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall to see how we protected these monuments. Immediately after the Second World War, the very first Congress of Roman Frontier Studies was held in Newcastle, which was a great move forward in international cooperation. And you can see here scholars from across the Roman Empire who met in Newcastle. And one of the important figures is this lady who became Professor Anne Robertson of the University of Glasgow, coin specialist, who was at that very first Congress. So we have a sound bedrock of international cooperation, and it's underpinned, if you like, by the experience we've gone through. If you've been in this boat ferry crossing the Danube, or indeed in these cattle trucks crossing the desert to visit a site in Jordan, it creates a rapport between you all, a camaraderie. And so this was the group which has helped us move forward in creating this Frontiers of the Roman Empire World Heritage Site. Colleagues from UNESCO itself and from across Europe were here at the Airte Hotel in Scotland, one of our meetings. And we decided we need money to help us move forward and prepare nominations and do the underpinning of the nomination. So we applied to the Kutch 2000 project of the EU and received a grant of over €1 million, which enabled us to undertake a variety of measures. One of which, incidentally, was preparing this map. This, I think, well, I would, wouldn't I, is the best map of the Roman Empire. Most of the time, if you ever see a map of the Roman Empire, it will tell you it was Roman Empire at its greatest extent, which was when Iraq was conquered. It lasted 3 years, so it wasn't to greatest extent for very long. So we've worked very hard to get this as accurate as possible. And drilling down from that, we've created other maps at a local level, such as this of the Upper German Rhaetian frontier, which is a World Heritage Site, and Dacia in Transylvania, which, as I mentioned, is in the hands of UNESCO at the moment. Roman archaeologists, certainly on frontiers, have been, I think, pretty good over the years in producing information about their subject. These are a series of guidebooks from the Antonine Wall through to modern Hungary. And part of the Frontiers of the Roman Empire project has been the creation of a series of what I think of as public information booklets. This is just a handful. We're about to produce the 21st in this series. It's with the printer at the moment. And these cover between them all the Roman frontiers of the Roman Empire. And the there are two parts. The first third, roughly, is an international section which describes what the frontiers of the Roman Empire are about, what we're trying to achieve across 3 continents. And the second 2/3 are about the particular area under discussion, which might be a country or a group of countries. The very first one which we produce, which is this, is actually in Arabic, English, French, and German. We've not hit as many as 4 languages since. They tend to be either English, French, and German, or English and a local language. So I think we've actually used 10 languages so far. And on my books, I have, believe it or not, 44 translators creating these books over the years. So these have been so far produced free of charge, but they've now been put in the hands of Archeo Press. And there's £14.95 is a pretty good price, I think, for the books, which are generally 96 pages long and provide an enormous amount of information on the project. We've also produced a DVD. This went out to 70,000 schools across Britain and Germany. And of course, the nomination and inscription of a monument as a World Heritage Site, which the Antonine Wall is, helps underpin other projects. This was the reorganized Hunterian Museum in Glasgow University, where most of the stones, inscriptions from the Antonine Wall are now on display. But we have had failures. We tried twinning museums. This went on with, I think, a couple of moves each way of staff to see how things worked. And then a new director came to our lead museum in Germany who didn't believe in international cooperation, and the whole thing stopped. The other way around, twinning schools, we didn't get quite so far with this because the Scottish head teacher who was taking the lead moved on, and his successor wasn't interested in the project, so that failed. We have challenges, many challenges. One of them is linking sites to museums. It's now 50 years and more that the World Heritage Convention was signed, and it focused on, for archaeologists, monuments, where earthworks like the Antonine Wall, buildings, Tower of London, and so on, or natural sites like St Kilda. Sometimes they might be mixed. Landscapes have come into fashion as well. But what's strange in some ways is that the artifacts that are in the monuments, such as the Antonine Wall, when taken out and placed in a museum, lose the protection which they have while they're in the ground as a World Heritage Site. So the inscription such as this, which tells us that the Antonine Wall was indeed built under the Emperor Antoninus Pius, here's his name, Antonino. It tells us which legion built this sector, the 20th, and how much they built, 3,000 feet in this case. And it gives us a scene of triumph. Victoria, presumably, putting a laurel wreath into the beak of the legion's eagle, watched by 2 bound, kneeling, captive barbarians. If this isn't a real scene of Roman triumph. But when it was taken out of the ground in the 1960s and placed in the Hunterian Museum, it ceased to have any World Heritage Site status. It's obviously protected, but for some time, archaeologists have been feeling that we need to have better links, a more holistic approach, if you like, between the monuments and the artifacts from them. the artifacts can be simply pottery. This is a group from Bearsden. We've got mixing bowls in the center and bottom right, cooking pots, and bowls for the food from the cooking pot and passed around for eating in the barrack room. And we've got jars, which are very interesting in their own right. They were used for carrying food and water, grain from the granary. So all these items, and you'll see the central one actually has a stamp of the maker, Sarius. These were once in the ground, protected. Once they're been put into the Hunting Museum, they lose that protection. And we feel that there should be some appropriate linking to create a better way of seeing our past artifacts and monuments together. Another interesting issue which faces us is historic cities. This is Regensburg, fascinating place in its own right. This is where the Holy Roman Empire came to an end in 1806. But you can see still the outline here of the Roman defenses. Sorry, it comes right out here, I beg your pardon. This is a World Heritage Site city, but the archaeology underneath it doesn't get the same form of protection because that's not part of the World Heritage Site nomination. It's only the architectural history of Regensburg gets protected. Strasbourg, Vienna are in the same position. So again, a more holistic approach to reflecting upon our protection of sites, not just what's visible, but what's below ground and invisible, is felt to be important today. I want to move on to another aspect, which is, if you like, the downside of World Heritage Sites. Be careful what you wish for. So this is the fort at the Saalburg in Germany. It's not completely reconstructed. Its reconstruction was paid for in the 1890s by the Kaiser Wilhelm, and he particularly chose this place for his fort because it reminded him of visits to his grandma at Balmoral. This was being reconstructed at the outlying walls and gates, the headquarters building, which you can see behind the gate, and one or two other buildings such as the granary and one of the barracks, which serves as a restaurant. This is when I first visited in the 1970s, and I apologize for the state of the photographs which follow. This must have been a poor day when I was there last. Well, we've got the same view a little further back. Looks good, doesn't it? But if you go even further back, the site is now surrounded by a fence and gates. And this fence has a great disadvantage of dividing off from the fort itself, which you can see to the left in the background, dividing it off from the other elements of the site, the earthworks of earlier military installations and the reconstructed palisade as well. You've got to come out and back in to the site in order to see these elements of the wider complex. This was the lower courses of a civilian house outside the fort back in the 1970s, and this has been restored as a shop today. The other site to mention is Petra. I was there again towards the end of last year, in September. It's wise to go there at 6 o'clock in the morning, as was the case here. And this gives you a feel of what one you're about to see when you enter the site. Even at 6 o'clock, the tourist shops were open. When we came out, the central one here, you can't really see, but in the daylight when we came out, you can see what it's all about. Indiana Jones Snacks Shop. I don't think there's anything more to be said. But coming into Petra, we see the treasury, and we get a feel for elements of the site with the camels to take you around if you wish, people building up in this area wanting to see the treasury, encouraged no doubt by the last scenes of Indiana and the Last Crusade, the Last Crusader, isn't it? I beg your pardon, where they galloped away from the treasury to Indiana Jones' shop in the entrance area, no doubt. It's what John Julius Norwich called tourist pollution. It's very interesting at Petra. As I said, I arrived early with a group of Dutch students who I was with at the time, and we set out to climb to the high point where you get a tremendous view over the whole complex. And when we came down for refreshments somewhere around 11 or half 11, a really large area of restaurants was almost completely empty. By the time we left an hour or so later, the tourists were flooding in groups. They were taken through Petra along the main road, given something to eat, and no doubt didn't see an awful lot else before they were marched out again. I find, a slightly sobering experience as somebody who wants to explore the monument at leisure. I was in Jordan to publish the book which is top left, The Eastern Frontiers of the Roman Empire. This is just one of the group of books which we published at the end of last year at a conference in Nijmegen. And I was absolutely determined that we weren't going to be seen as arrogant Westerners telling our Jordanian colleagues what to do. So we went through to Jordan to launch the book. The king's uncle, Prince Hassan, had kindly written the foreword, and here he is signing the books. And in the background, three of the authors, Fauzi Abadana, who to the left, who is Professor of Archaeology and Heritage Management in Jordan, and Mark Driessen of the University of Leiden to the right. And this was, for us, significant. We want equal cooperation in trying to take forward the protection of the remains of the frontiers of the Roman Empire. And one of these is this, Gaza Bashir, which you've already seen briefly. Gaza Bashir, as I said, is the best surviving fort in the whole Roman Empire. It sits in a desert, as you can see, and over the gate, which is in the center of the wall facing us, is the inscription recording the building of the fort about the year 300 under the emperors who were listed, and the governor of the province, and the name of the unit is provided as well. But you can perhaps see in the center here, there's a crack, there's actually two cracks, and there's been a bit of give over the top where you can see the light shining through. All of us were familiar with the site, and we looked at this and we thought, gosh, it's about time something was done. We've got a problem here with people coming and graffiti. So we're concerned about the site in a variety of ways. But in particular, this view. This is not only the best surviving fort in the whole empire, it is the only fort in the whole Roman Empire where the original building inscription is still in situ, in its original location, as you can see. So by the time we left Jordan a week later, I'd already managed to persuade my benefactor to provide money for the remedial work to protect the gate, which will be done under the supervision of a Jordanian architect. The other problem is quite simply this. You see in the center of the fort, it's a wonderful experience visiting it. It's just a speck in the distance in the desert, and gradually gets larger and larger and larger until you're right beside it, as you've already seen. And it scares us all that this, not just the best preserved fort, the only one with an inscription over the gate, but also the only one in Jordan and most of Syria for that matter, I don't know Syria as well, that sits still in the middle of a desert with no modern buildings around it. And we fear that if we bring this to the attention of the public, there'll be more and more visitors, and this will result in damage to the not just the building, which is fragile, but also the very environment where it sits. My Spanish colleagues suggested, tongue-in-cheek, that we erect a barbed wire fence just out of sight around the monument to help discourage vandalism. 4x4, people on 4x4s can very easily get there now, and we've seen they prepare to scroll over the stonework. So we've got a really serious challenge here, in which colleagues such as Becky and literally across the world are trying to provide support and consider the ways forward for the protection of this site, which is on the tentative list, the preliminary list, which UNESCO has agreed it is a potential World Heritage Site, but we won't get anywhere in putting it forward unless we can prove, as we did with the Antonine Wall, that we can manage its future safely. So, as you can see, there's still a lot to do on Roman frontiers. We seek nomination of them as a World Heritage Site because it will provide a level of protection. It will encourage their better conservation, management, preservation, interpretation in the long-term future, and of course, encourage people to know them better. So we will not be like these Roman soldiers simply playing dice and whiling the decades of protection of the frontier in the 2nd century, whiling that away. We will be busy across the whole Roman Empire seeking to extend the protection which is afforded by UNESCO. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. I think we can probably just imagine virtual applause now, because obviously these things are never straightforward. And thank you for those who've already put some questions in the Q&A. For those of you who hadn't seen it, I put a link to the book series that David referred to in the chat, so hopefully you'll be able to see that. And I've answered, I think there were one or two sort of just clarification comments in the Q&A that I've already answered. But if I can start with the first question for you, David, that's come in from Andy, who's saying you visited Cadder Fort, now disappeared, and the wall near it, but there was no signage. Is this something planned? Do you want me to try and answer that one, or shall I? Well,
I'll start if I may. Yes. This is nearly 20 years ago, along the Antonine Wall. We started in the West End, and there are stretches where the wall line hasn't been built on, but there are no notices. And he said, David, you know, this is very strange. Where are the notices gone? Where's the signage? And I said, I'm sorry, mate, but this is bandit country. I've got a slide which I must rediscover of one of our notice boards being used as target practice. We've had problems with when we had a custodian at the site at Rough Castle. His hut was burnt down, he was fired at, the notices were fired at. we had terrible problems for a time with quad bike people who thought the earthworks, the humps and bumps of the Antonine Wall, tremendous place to go quad biking. The issue here is a lot of effort was put, as you can imagine, into creating the World Heritage Site. Once that's done, of course, it's raised expectations, and there are issues of how we take those forward. First questions were, okay, let's put up some notices. Notices are okay, but people these days go to the Antonine Wall, obviously, usually in a car. So if you're going to encourage more visitors, you need more car parking, and car parking can't be arranged overnight. So a lot of our problems are interwoven. I agree, it would be nice to have a notice at Cadder. If it was left to me, it would be better, if I may say, and I've been retired for 12 years, so it's not my problem, but it would be better to try to put, for us all to put more effort into marking the sections which, where there is something visible. There is a map. Becky's office and mine created a new map of the Antonine Wall. Is that still in print, Becky? Not sure.
It's not still in print, but I would point people to the app now. So I don't know if you want to mention that or you want me to mention.
No, I'll leave you to that.
That there is an app that you can download both for Android and iPhone, totally free. So just go to whichever Play Store that you use and search Antonine Wall, and you can download it. And that does actually have a huge amount of information, and it kind of gets over some of the display board issues that David was saying, in that actually a lot of information can go in. And the great thing about it is more and more information can be put in, and you can download information on particular sites. And also it does tackle some of the museum issue that David was mentioning, talking about the sort of disjunct between sites and monuments, in that actually a lot of the key, some of the really important artifacts have been scanned. And so that actually you can look at some of the artifacts that came from the site when you're on the site. And then conversely, when you're visiting the artifacts in whichever museum they're in, a lot of them are in the Hunterian, then you can then look up the site they came from on the app. So I would encourage you to download the app, and that might at least help with that one. The next question, actually, which kind of follows on from some of the things about visitors, is, are there plans to develop cycle and walking routes along the Antonine Wall, as is done for the German Limes? Because that would help raise awareness with the public.
Yeah, I don't know of any. When I did a leaflet on the Antonine Wall many years ago, I pointed out that one of the best walks, and it's easy to do, is from Castle Carey on the border of Falkirk, west border of Falkirk region. You walk from there to Twecker along the wall and back along the canal, and that's a 12-mile walk. That's good. Otherwise, a lot of the issues are because one would have to walk along roads, and once you get to Twecker or Bar Hill, which is the centre point of the wall, there's unfortunately not a lot visible to the west, and you would be walking along walls all the time. But it's something that we ought to come back to and reconsider. Over to you, Becky.
Yeah, no, what I will say is I know that the group of people managing the wall have been working very closely with the John Muir Way, with a view to actually providing access points to key points, because I think everyone's looked at what was done. I know you mentioned the German Limes in the question, but what was done for the Hadrian's Wall with regards to the walk, and that's actually caused an awful lot of conservation issues, because it's been probably way more successful than was anticipated. And the Antonine Wall is not a stone, by and large, a stone-built wall. There's a fragility to the remains, but actually you've got to try and balance conservation with public awareness, public desires. And so the plan is to have a series of nodal points where you can visit it from the John Muir Way, so that there's actually walking opportunities. And obviously there's cycle paths, because the wall and the canal intersect at various points, and there's cycle paths. So although I think there isn't a plan for something formal that's branded that, there will be opportunities to actually help raise awareness. And I think, and somebody else has sort of said about, there's not a lot about the benefits of the World Heritage and more about the issues. But I will say that over the last few years, and it's in its final stages now, there has been a project between the 6 partners for the wall, which is Historic Environment Scotland, and the 5 local authorities, to actually do a lot for raising awareness. And it's everything from sort of some really fantastic graffiti art to comic books to the 2 big Roman sculptures that you see, to replicas of distant stones back out in the landscape, a lot more information and a lot more sort of things that are about bringing the Roman past to life. And thus far, it has been a hugely successful project. The evaluation work I know is ongoing at the moment. But I would say that actually, and I think sort of one of the things that David has touched upon in his talk is actually how you juggle those needs of conservation, but also then the public interest, because obviously there's an expectation of accessibility. And that accessibility isn't just physical accessibility, it's intellectual accessibility. It's how you actually make everything accessible. And the one of the really positive things that the World Heritage status does bring you is an increased awareness. And when you are bidding for funding, so a large part of the funds for that particular project come from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, you've already demonstrated that your site is important because it's on the global stage. It's been inscribed by UNESCO. So actually the first stage, why this site, is actually the easiest one to overcome. And the other process of becoming a World Heritage property, as David touched upon, is about bringing all the key stakeholders together, particularly from a political level when you're looking at a monument that covers multiple things. And obviously for a site as complex as the Antonine Wall, that's political within Scotland, within local authorities, but it's also then the political aspect internationally. And that's sort of one of the challenges, but I wouldn't ever say it's, I think there have been challenges, but it has also been enormously enjoyable. And the collaboration that spins from it, I think, as David has touched upon, and the Casa Bashir is perhaps a good example of the fact that, it's an opportunity to shine an international spotlight in a country that knows it's going to need international cooperation to help it firstly move forward with the conservation, but also then ultimately with the World Heritage nomination. So I think that one's answered. And then the next one is, I want to cycle and camp 300 miles of the German Limes over 10 days. Which 300 miles would you recommend? Over to you, David. I'm sure you'd throw the Zalberg into that, having shown it. But to be honest, there's quite a lot of, there's leaflets and websites which specifically around that Deutsche Limesstrasse and the Roman road that they've got, the sort of connecting route. So I would be tempted, I mean, David, do jump in, but I would be tempted to say, have a look at that and see which ones really you look like they're most interesting to you.
I think, I mean, if I were to choose myself, the Taunus Mountains north of Frankfurt is the most exciting scenery. If you're interested in cycling, Austria is perhaps a better place. There's a cycle route along the Danube with forts visible at Tulln, Treismayer Mountain, and so on. So you get a whole collection of really interesting sites standing sometimes 2 stories high. And it's a record on the flat because you're going along the riverbank. Returning to the comment about I was a bit negative. That's very interesting. I was trying to offer a balanced picture. And there are issues with World Heritage sites which any conservator will appreciate. And we can see this in Scotland. The National Trust has operated a policy for at least 20 years of closing some sites where they feel they are over-visited. And with the best will in the world, visitors can, without even thinking about it, cause damage. Some sites like Maze Howe have visitors numbers restricted. That's a World Heritage site, simply because of the fumes that we breathe out have a deleterious effect upon the interior of the chamber tomb in that case. And I thought, on the whole, most of us will be familiar with the benefits of World Heritage Site, which is improved access, car parking, notices, and so on, but not perhaps so familiar with the issues surrounding them, the problems. But thank you for the comment, because next time I give this lecture, and sometimes I do actually give it as an after dinner lecture, I'll make sure I end on a high note.
Thank you, David. There was a follow-up one to the signage. It was about a lady who'd been walking her dog along the wall for 15 years and didn't know what she was walking on. As I say, that there's been so much work trying to raise awareness. It's again with all these things, you're looking at a monument that's 40 odd miles long, and so any interpretation and any information is going to be in pockets. And I think the thing with CADA is actually because there is nothing there. Nothing to see, but and the app has been one way of doing it, but of course not everybody wants to download an app, so I do appreciate that. And I'm not up to speed with what the current plans are with the local authority around the CADA area, but I'd like to think that there is at least increased awareness in certainly pockets of local communities along the wall, because the other thing, in fact, actually, David, if you're looking for something upbeat to finish with in future, a photograph of one of the play parks, because there are now 5 play parks that are Roman themed. Actually, there's 6, because there was another one done prior to this project. So there are 6 Roman themed play parks along the Antonine Wall, different size, scale, different approaches, because again, they've all been worked on with local communities. In some instances, local school children have helped design them. And so a lot of that is about raising awareness, because if we want to stop vandalism, we want to encourage people to appreciate what it is they've got, and by appreciating it, they need to understand, know what it is, and hopefully think it's something worth protecting. So there's an education element to it, as well as actually recognizing that also people value different things in different ways for different reasons, and that's a very complex thing to get into in terms of actually thinking about how people how they conceive and think of things, that those of us who are heritage professionals just see it as well. Of course, you know, it needs protecting, but actually somebody might say, well, why? What's important? And so those community benefits are really very, very important in terms of actually ensuring that we do highlight that. And then, right, okay, so 2 more questions. So one's a thank you. So that's great. And the other one is the app that I've been talking about. It's called the Antonine Wall app. So if you just go into the App Store and type in Antonine Wall, then you will get it. And actually, there is also one that's on the same platform. Again, it was done as a partnership project for the German Limes in Bavaria. I can't now remember what that's called now, but again, if you type in Bavarian Limes, Limes, then you can download that app as well, and that might be useful. I'm trying to think, it probably doesn't necessarily cover the bits that you might want to cycle, but it might, so it will be something to look at. Thank you. Someone has just put, Andy has just put the link to the Google Play in the answer, so thank you for that. And as I say, it's also on iPhone. I'm conscious that we're almost out of time now. Sorry, David.
No, it was just, I mean, one of the great advantages, that group of people that Earth Castle the other year, I mean, within that is a chap who created the apps. He started out doing videos and DVDs, and he's now doing apps. And he's part of what the app has flowed out of is the meeting of this international community, thinking about not just the protection, but about the interpretation of World Heritage sites. And you all know that when you get a group of people together, we might have an initial program, which we had when we applied for the grant from Kutch 2000, but many things like the DVDs, for example, and the books and so on, actually flowed out of interested, committed people sitting down and thinking together and having a beer and coming up with the good ideas, many of which you've seen this lunchtime. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you very much, David. I'm conscious of time, so I will bring this to a close and thank David very much. I mean, obviously the focus of this has been very much around conservation, and the sort of genesis of the whole series, of which this is the last one, is around efforts to protect and repair our planet's natural and cultural resources, and looking at the vast and varied work being done in this area, including through several innovative and exciting conservation projects in Scotland. And I think we've had a sort of a snapshot of aspects of that from David today. So I'll finish by thanking, and I say, you can imagine the virtual applause, but thanking David again on behalf of you all. And also, as I say, to say that this is the last session as part of the RSE Investigates Conservation Series. And particularly like to thank Professor Mary Bounds, a Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, for her work on the series. And a note from the organisers saying that for future RSE events, please do visit the rse.org.uk website and have a look at the Curious programme as well, which is rse-curious.com. And with that, thank you all very much for attending, and thank you very much, David, for a really interesting talk.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.